You're with the deep dive because, like us, you want to get past the headlines, really understand the complex stuff, but, efficiently.
Exactly. We cut through the noise.
And today, we've got a really fascinating study. It's a perfect shortcut to getting informed about Caribbean energy futures.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive into, and it's a bit of a mouthful, a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics, this study by Oyewo et al.
Whoa, okay. That title tells you it's serious research.
It does. It's incredibly comprehensive, especially if you're tracking how island nations, well, how they plan to power their future.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. What's the core problem this study is tackling?
Well, the central issue, the big one highlighted in this study, is the Caribbean's really heavy reliance on imported petroleum.
How heavy are we talking?
We're talking over 90% of their energy needs, met by expensive imported oil and diesel.
Wow, over 90%.
Yeah. And think about the economic hit. It's a constant drain, makes them super vulnerable to global price swings. And of course, the climate impact is significant.
Right. This study really digs into that economic weight, doesn't it?
It does. The analysis points to figures suggesting around 13% of the entire Caribbean's GDP goes towards just importing oil.
13%? That's huge.
It's a massive chunk of economic potential just gone. And this study makes it clear, things like global conflicts just make those fossil fuel prices even more unstable, more pressure.
And this is all happening while the region is getting hit harder and harder by climate change itself.
Exactly. This study reminds us, they're on the front lines, rising seas, bigger hurricanes. Sticking with fossil fuels just makes those risks worse. Plus, as this study notes, the whole COVID situation hitting tourism, it just adds another layer of urgency. They need more stable, sustainable economic options.
And energy independence looks like a key part of that puzzle. So our mission today, digging into a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics. This study, by Oyewo et al., is really to pull out the key insights. How can they shift to renewables? And what's this about offshore solar?
Right. And what's really compelling about this study is how broad it is. It's multi-sector, so it's not just electricity. It's power, heat, and transport.
Okay.
Then multi-node means it looks at the differences across various islands and regions. And like the title says, this study really zooms in on offshore floating photovoltaics, FPV.
FPV, offshore solar.
Yeah, potentially a real game changer for islands where land is, well, scarce.
That makes sense, putting solar panels out on the water. And this study doesn't just theorize, right? It uses some serious modeling.
That's right. This study uses something called the LUT Energy System Transition Model.
Okay.
Think of it as like a super detailed simulation. It can model energy supply and demand hour by hour under all sorts of different conditions, different policy choices.
So it lets the researchers really test out different futures.
Exactly. Lets them see what different transition pathways might actually look like.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty, the current challenges. We mentioned the fuel dependence, but what else does this study highlight?
Well, beyond that huge reliance on imports, this study really stresses the vulnerability it creates. Almost every nation there, maybe except Trinidad and Tobago, is just exposed to the whims of the global energy market.
Right. It's not abstract economics. It hits people's cost of living, development plans.
Directly.
Right.
That 13% of GDP figure we mentioned. This study uses that to paint a picture of capital just flowing out, money that could be used for schools, healthcare, infrastructure.
Yeah.
And this study is pretty blunt. This path just isn't sustainable, not economically, not environmentally. It really sets the stage for why change is so critical.
So, given that stark picture, where does a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics, this study by Oyewo et al., see the light, the opportunities?
This study is actually very optimistic about the renewable potential there. Huge potential, particularly solar PV and wind.
Sun and wind. The Caribbean has plenty of both, right?
Absolutely. Blessed with sunshine, consistent winds. Natural advantages just waiting to be properly harnessed, according to this study.
And the costs for solar and wind have plummeted recently, haven't they?
Dramatically. This study really underscores that. These technologies are increasingly cost competitive, sometimes even cheaper than fossil fuels without subsidies.
Okay, so that's crucial.
It's central. This economic viability is why the optimistic scenarios in this study look achievable.
So it's not just about doing the right thing environmentally. This study makes a strong economic case, too.
That's a key takeaway. This study argues that building up renewables could be a massive engine for post-COVID recovery, new industries, local jobs, attracting investment.
Right, shifting the flow of that capital back inward.
Exactly. It's about moving towards a future where the Caribbean has more control. This study envisions a more sustainable, definitely more reliable, and critically, a more affordable energy supply.
Getting off the roller coaster of global fuel prices?
That's the goal.
Okay, but renewables like solar and wind, they aren't constant. The sun sets, the wind drops. This study must address that integration challenge.
Oh, absolutely. That variability is a critical piece this study tackles head on. You need flexibility of solutions. You can't just plug in solar panels and hope for the best 2047.
And for islands, finding space for huge solar farms or wind turbines, land is tight.
Precisely. This study identifies land constraints as a major hurdle, and that's where this focus on offshore floating PV, the FPV, becomes so vital in their analysis.
Ah, okay. So FPV is positioned as the answer to the land scarcity problem.
It's presented in this study as a key strategy, turning ocean space, which they often have a lot of in their economic zones, into potential power generation real estate.
Makes sense. Tailored to the island context.
Exactly. This study sees it as a way to scale up solar significantly without competing for precious land needed for agriculture, tourism, or housing.
And does this study suggest FPV could do more than just generate electricity?
Yes, that's another interesting angle in this study. It explores FPV's potential role in what they call a sustainable blue economy,
Blue economy.
meaning combining these floating solar arrays with things like aquaculture, maybe other sustainable ocean activities. This study even points to places like the Maldives, where FPV is seen as potentially transformative for energy and economy.
Okay, fascinating. Now, this study looks at different possible futures using scenarios. Can you give us the overview?
Sure. This study mainly compares three: the best policy scenario, or BPS,
Okay.
the delayed policy scenario, DPS, and the current policy scenario, CPS.
So BPS is the ambitious one.
Right. BPS aims for 100% renewable energy by 2050. DPS is slower, and CPS is basically business as usual if policies don't change much.
And what does this study find in that ambitious best policy scenario? What's the headline?
Well, the BPS projections in this study are pretty striking. By 2050, solar PV and wind power utterly dominate electricity generation.
How dominant.
Depending on the specific BPS variations this study modeled, solar PV could supply somewhere between, say, 67% and up to 90% of the electricity.
90%.
Yeah, and wind power contributing maybe 6% to 30%. It's a complete transformation from today's mix.
What about other renewables? Hydro, geothermal, do they feature in the vision from this study?
They do. This study shows them playing an important supporting role. Hydropower where available, bioenergy, geothermal. They add diversity and with the flexibility needed to balance the variable solar and wind.
Okay. This study also mentions something called a solar to X economy. Can you break that down?
Sure. The Solido-X economy, as this study describes it, is basically using all that abundant, cheap, renewable electricity, mainly solar,
Right.
as the primary energy source to create other things. The X can be different energy carriers or products.
Like what?
Think using surplus solar power when generation is high to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis. Or synthetic fuels, things you can store or use in sectors that are hard to electrify directly.
Ah, so heavy transport, maybe some industrial processes.
Exactly. Aviation, shipping, high-temperature industrial heat. This conversion is often called power to X, turning renewable power into storable, usable fuels or feedstocks.
So renewable electricity becomes the bedrock for green fuels.
That's the idea in this study. But it also stresses you can't just have generation. You need storage batteries, hydrogen tanks, even storing heat.
Right, for when the sun isn't shining.
And this study highlights sector coupling, integrating the power, heat, and transport sectors so they work together more efficiently. Plus, demand-side flexibility.
Like smart charging for electric cars.
Exactly. EVs that charge when power is plentiful, and maybe even feed power back to the grid when needed, vehicle to grid, or V2G. It's a whole interconnected system envisioned in this study.
Sounds complex, but potentially very efficient. What about the cost? This massive transition, surely it's expensive. This is where a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics, this study by Oyewo et al. Gets really interesting, right?
It really does, because counterintuitively perhaps, this study projects that these renewable pathways, especially that ambitious BPS,
Yeah.
could actually be 7 to 10% cheaper overall than sticking with the fossil fuel-heavy current policy scenario.
Cheaper, really.
7 to 10% lower total system costs. That's a huge finding from this study. It suggests the clean energy path isn't just environmentally vital, it might be the more economically sound choice for the Caribbean.
Wow. Okay, that flips the usual narrative. Lower costs, energy independence, and climate action. What other economic benefits does this study foresee?
Well, this study points to big potential for new industries, job creation, investment opportunities. Think manufacturing, installation, maintenance of renewables, developing these power-to-X systems, a whole new economic ecosystem.
Fuel all this electrification, though, electricity generation itself must need to scale up massively.
Oh, hugely. This study projects that in the BPS, total electricity generation needed by 2050 could be anywhere from 3 to 8 times higher than it was in 2020.
3 to 8 times.
Yeah, because you're electrifying transport, parts of industry, maybe producing hydrogen. It shows the sheer scale of the energy system transformation required.
And transport. How does this study see that sector changing? Lots of gas guzzlers there now.
This study anticipates a huge shift. Around 14.1 million electric vehicles projected in the BPS by 2050.
14 million EVs.
Yeah. And for things like planes and ships that are harder to run on batteries, this study emphasizes the critical role of those e-fuels we talked about, made from renewable power.
And the bottom line, carbon emissions. What does this study forecast?
Well, here the difference is night and day. This study shows CO2 emissions plummeting in the BPS, reaching net zero by 2050, meeting climate goals.
And the current policy scenario.
Emissions just keep climbing under the CPS projections in this study. Business as usual means worsening climate impacts for a region already very vulnerable.
Okay, let's circle back specifically to the offshore floating PV. Why was it such a specific focus for a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics, this study by OUO et al.?
Because, as we said, land scarcity is just such a defining constraint for many islands. This study clearly saw FPV as a tailored solution, using their expensive ocean space, their exclusive economic zones.
Right. And did this study quantify the potential impact of FTV on the energy mix?
Yes, and the numbers are quite compelling. The analysis in this study suggests that even if you limit ground-mounted solar to just, say, 1% of the total land area.
Which is very limited.
Very limited. Even then, offshore FPV could contribute significantly, potentially up to 45% of total electricity generation in some BPS variations analyzed in this study.
45% from offshore solar alone.
Potentially, yes. It highlights that FPD isn't just some niche add-on. This study positions it as potentially a cornerstone technology for their renewable transition.
So not just solving the land issue, but becoming a major pillar of energy independence and security, according to this study.
Precisely. This study emphasizes FPV's potential to provide stable, reliable, large-scale clean energy, really boosting energy security and cutting that reliance on volatile global fuel markets.
Makes sense. Lastly, policy. This study lays out the technical and economic case, but making it happen requires political will, right?
Absolutely. While this study is primarily technical economic, it strongly implies the need for supportive policies. Things like clear renewable energy targets, investment incentives, streamlined permitting, especially for newer tech like FPV.
So the detailed pathways in this study give policymakers a kind of roadmap.
Exactly. It provides crucial data and analysis to inform those policy decisions, showing what's technically possible and economically beneficial.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into a multi-sector, multi-node, and multi-scenario energy system analysis for the Caribbean, with focus on the role of offshore floating photovoltaics, this study by OUO et al. What's the absolute core takeaway for you?
For me, the clearest message from this study is that the Caribbean has this incredible opportunity. They can build an energy future that's cheaper, cleaner, more reliable, and give them energy independence. It's powered by renewables, and technologies like offshore floating PV, as this study really emphasizes, are key to unlocking that potential, especially given the land constraints.
Yeah, the really striking thing for me is that finding about cost, that shifting from expensive polluting imports to this solar to X future analyzed in this study isn't just greener, it's actually projected to be cheaper.
Exactly. That's a powerful note. This study doesn't suggest it's easy. It's a complex transition, needs investment, planning, commitment.
Sure.
But this study provides really strong evidence that it's technically feasible and economically advantageous. The upsides, cost savings, energy security, climate resilience seem massive. based on this analysis.
Okay, a final thought then, building on all this. Considering these clear economic and environmental benefits laid out in this study, what do you think are the biggest practical hurdles, the real on-the-ground challenges, to actually speeding up adoption of renewables and tech like offshore FPV in island nations? And maybe what innovative solutions could help overcome those specific hurdles? Something for our listeners to chew on after this dive.
A great question to ponder.
We definitely encourage everyone to explore the topic further, maybe even dig into the full this study if you're really keen. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.